Within the heart of Eden, where all things were named by the gods, where light flowed only through sanctified channels, a rupture was silently tearing at the fabric of reality. Lulu, the first creation to bear both divine blood and sacred clay, had touched a forbidden me, not a tablet nor an object, but a living frequency, a fragment of cosmic memory once sealed by the gods in eternal silence. In the very instant a human hand brushed against heaven's secret space itself, quivered like a soul being torn apart. The winds ceased. The earth held its breath. Trees bowed their heads, and the light in the air shattered into invisible echoes of sound. All things, from stone to mist, knew a taboo had been awakened. In Lulu's eyes, what flared was not understanding, but memory. A memory never meant for mankind, a memory in the shape of an ancient flame, a light not bestowed but stolen, that had once incinerated elder worlds, that had once summoned divine councils from the shadows. It was the primordial flame, the original light the gods used to shape order, but also the blade that could sever the very throne on which they sat. No one taught Lulu how to wield it. But such light requires no teaching. It activates the silent strands of DNA layers of memory, not encoded in cells, but in the frequencies of the soul. Lulu saw not only his origin, but things yet to come, the fall of divine dominion, the uprising of consciousness, and the final war between freedom and control. In that moment, Lulu was no longer a creature, he was the first fracture in the order of the cosmos, and the gods, dwelling in heavens veiled by silence and law, felt the axis of creation shift. The ME was no longer contained. The light had breached its bounds. A mortal had stepped into a realm reserved only for divinity. Order was unraveling. The fragile balance was pushed to its brink. And as in all past ages of the universe, when light fell into the hands of the unchosen, the gods faced the same choice: to restore order through blood, or to confront a war not of swords and spears, but of memory awakening and long-buried truth. In the seventh heaven, where light is no longer a wave but a thought, where the gods exist, not in form, but in frequency. Inanna paused in her meditative drift. She sensed an anomaly cleaving the rhythmic pulse of heaven and earth. A strange frequency, out of phase, unauthorized, not born of any temple, not sanctified by symbols, was surging with the ancient signature of the ME, those primordial resonance codes used to structure the very order of the cosmos. The ME had been activated, but not by a god. In all the remembered history of the divine realms, there had only been two prior instances where a ME awakened in the hands of the unworthy, once leading to the extinction of a primordial planet, and once more the birth of a species so radically free it had to be erased from the memory of the nebulae. To Inanna, this was the third, and the one who had activated it was neither angel nor descendant of the High Council, but a creature of clay, Lulu. She did not scream, she did not rage, she was silent. But Inanna's silence was the storm before form. Within, she gazed upon Lulu as one might peer into a mirror, reflecting collapse. He bore no sword, no authority, no sacred tongue. Yet he dared gaze into the light and was not consumed. He had stepped into a void where only gods had ever stood. It was a sacred insult. But more than that, it was an existential threat to the foundation of all power, because Inanna knew if a mortal could reach the frequency of beginnings, if ancient memory could break free from temple control, then everything she had built, uruk, the layers of worship, the rites of offering, the architecture of faith, would become shards. She, the goddess of love who had never loved anything but order. Her love was structure, where every emotion carried a price, where every prayer was measured in submission. If humankind could open the gate to the soul of the cosmos on their own, who would still need temples, who would still need her? Inanna did not envy Lulu. She was terrified of the potential he had not yet realized he held. The ME was not a tool. It was the primordial language of the universe, a code that wove spiritual law and physical law into the same frequency. Once humans touched it, individual consciousness would transcend the body, merge with the memories of stars, and from there, tear down all walls of control, and control that was the very foundation of Inanna's throne. She stood in the seventh heaven, where celestial bodies orbit the divine mind, and made a decision not by decree, but through consciousness. Lulu must not be allowed to expand the ME further. The remaining ME must not be freed beyond the temple boundaries. The light must be reclaimed. The flame must be sealed. And if this could not be done by diplomacy, then it would be done by design. Inanna understood to reclaim the light, one does not use strength but symbol. She did not need to seize the ME by force. She only needed to make the keeper of the light, Enki, open the gate himself. And to do that she would speak in a language older than the ME, the language of beauty, of temptation, of faith and peace. Because sometimes the easiest way to steal a weapon is to make its guardian believe he is offering it. Inanna stepped through the gate of light, bearing no army, no divine weapons, only a robe woven from the silent strands of the Milky Way. A gate soft as smoke, and the gaze of one who understands the power of gentleness. She did not arrive as a conqueror, but as a daughter, returning empty-handed, heart wide open. Yet beneath that benevolent smile was a will sharp as celestial jade. Eden trembled in its atmospheric layers as her foot touched the ground. The current of reality faltered, as if Earth itself were straining to hear the conversation about to unfold. Enki, keeper of the Abzu, god of ancient wisdom of waters and labyrinths, stood waiting. There were no greetings, no rites. Between them lay an unwritten history, a tangled bloodline of creation and rebellion. But today, Inanna had not come to debate philosophy. She came with a single purpose: to reclaim the light, under the guise of protecting humanity on behalf of divine authority. Her voice rang out like the echo of a planet's first breath. Uncle Enki. If mankind has accidentally stepped into the light, then perhaps I, descendant of divine blood keeper of peace across the realms, am the rightful one to hold the me not to seize, but to safeguard. She invoked lineage, emphasizing her familial bond with Ninhursag and Enki himself. She spoke of the instability the Emmy might bring when wielded by a species not yet evolved, of the threat of chaos to the divine human order. Her tone was kind, but every word carried the cold precision of power, that light must belong to the one who can control it. Enki remained silent. His eyes, dark as abyssal wells, reflected the entirety of forgotten history. Not anger, not suspicion, but a depth so vast that even truth hesitated to gaze into it. Inanna, he said, his voice low as stone sinking into the ocean. The ME are not lamps to be passed from hand to hand. They are not powers to be possessed, nor tools to preserve order. They are primordial truth. And truth, once illuminated, cannot be reclaimed. It will not serve any temple. Her face did not change, but Enki saw the flicker in her frequency. He knew she had not come to persuade, she came to measure his readiness. The feast had not begun, but the game was already in motion. He continued, eyes gazing directly into Inanna's soul, not in judgment, but with the recognition of a creator who had once lost his way. You want to guard the ME because you fear it. You fear what may happen if humans no longer need the gods. You fear that if they remember for themselves, then all that you have built will crumble to dust. But true light needs no gatekeeper. It comes when it comes, and when it does, no temple will stop it. Inanna turned away in silence, but the air around her changed. No longer the mist of reconciliation, now a thin frost of unshakable resolve. She knew Enki would not give her the ME, but that didn't matter. She didn't need his permission. She only needed an opening, even the narrowest crack through which the flame could return to divine hands. And she knew how to open it. Not through war, not through threats, but through the oldest feast the cosmos has ever known, a feast where truth is lulled to sleep by beauty, and light is stolen in a dream of sweetness. Within her the plan was already formed, like a wind laced with the scent of flowers and poison, ready to sweep across the waters of the abzu, and cloud even the oldest wisdom if only for one night. Night fell upon the abzu, not as a moment, but as a ritual. The moon did not merely shine, it observed like a silver eye, silently witnessing the communion between God and God. On the lake's edge, Inanna, radiant like a descended star, prepared a feast, not for drinking but for bending memory. The wine she poured was not distilled from grapes, but from the sap of the world tree, fused with fragments of soul left over from the age of Tiamat. The sounds she offered were not melodies. They were phonemes from the first strata of creation, words so ancient that the gods had forbidden them, fearing their own dissolution upon hearing them again. Enki, bearer of primordial wisdom, God of the deep waters and the forge of creation, sat in knowing silence. He understood that the wine carried more than taste. He heard each note, not just with his ears, but with the frequencies in his blood, where memories of old universes still trembled like breath unfinished. Yet he did not stop her. Perhaps he wanted to test Inanna. Perhaps he wished to see what would unfold when even gods were drawn into the cycle of power and faith. Or perhaps a quiet, weary part of him longed to be freed from the burden of truth. The wine took hold. The music lingered. Time stretched and folded. Enki did not become drunk as mortals do. He entered the sleep of the gods, a state where the soul drifts free of form, gliding through layers of reality like a weightless wing. In that state he saw himself from behind, no longer the keeper of the Emi, but a part of them. He saw the past when the Emi were first etched into the bones of planets with threads of light. He saw the future when the Emi would once again fall into unready hands, hands bold enough to reach. And he saw Inanna, not as a deceiver, but as an inevitable part of the awakening cycle. In the trance, Enki did not feel anger, only the silent acceptance of a god who understands sometimes for the light to truly spread, it must be stolen. Inanna did not hesitate. As he collapsed, she stepped into the heart of the abzu, where the Emi were sealed, layered in sound frequency and symbol. But she held the key, not a material one, but the sonic frequency she had just sung. One by one the gates opened, not with a sound but with a tremble, like the whispers of stars spoken millions of years ago. The Emi lay there, not uniform, not literal symbols, but fragments of universal memory, each one a sacred note, a living equation, a spiritual replica of reality's structure. Inanna did not hoard. She selected with care, like one choosing seeds to sow in the soil of power. She took 94, me enough to build a civilization, establish a ruling system, calibrate the cycle of life and death, rewrite the concept of worship. And most crucially, she took the Emi of human kingship, a frequency no god had ever granted, only hidden, like a threat never spoken aloud. As the moon began to descend toward the western edge of the sky, Inanna departed from the abzu. No one stopped her. No spirit stirred, and Enki, still within his deep god-sleep, did not bind her, did not call, did not forbid, because he knew, once light is stolen, it never returns the same. It multiplies, mutates, rises through the hands of those once thought weakest. And within that chaos there lies the possibility that the Emi themselves might one day choose their true master. And thus Inanna vanished into the night, leaving no footprints, only a dissonant tremor in the foundation of universal order. Across the unmapped plains, where the air still carried the primal breath of a world yet unnamed, Inanna paused. There were no temples here, no rituals, no lines of kneeling worshippers, only raw earth water flowing without purpose, and a vast sky waiting for a new power to leave its mark. And it was here that she released the Me, not as a creator, sowing life but as a conqueror, seeding destiny through stolen light. The Me reacted to the land like a command awakening dormant DNA in the crystalline core of the planet. The earth cracked, rising into walls. Water carved itself into channels like veins, forming within a newborn body. Structures did not rise by construction. They emerged like memories recalled. A city not built but summoned. Uruk was not born of architecture. It manifested as an inscription into the soul structure of the world. At its center, Inanna erected the Temple of Light, where she embedded the Me into stone pillars that emitted frequencies, each frequency encoding a specific law. Laws of speech, laws of thought, laws of existential hierarchy. No more ancient tongues, she issued a new language, not of words, but of thought, structure. Whoever spoke in that tongue would think within its system. Who could not speak it would not be able to think at all. It was not a language of inspiration, but one that shaped the boundaries of consciousness. She stratified the soul. The lower tier, those who serve. The middle, those who maintain ritual. The upper, those who know how to keep silent. At the peak stood herself not as the goddess of love, but as the orchestrator of divine will, wielding the stolen Me. From that moment, Inanna was no longer merely worshipped. She became the synchronizing center between heaven and earth, a deity of signal control. People flocked to Uruk, not for love, not for faith, but out of fear of being left outside the order of light. Lands untouched by the Me began to fade. Nameless, unrecognized, omitted from the rewritten history inscribed in the script of Uruk. Those who did not conform were labeled unawakened. Those who resisted were buried in zones of frequency silence, where all vibration was erased from the memory of the cosmos. Thus, Inanna became the first symbol of coercive theocracy, a form of power not grounded in sacred blessing, but in the possession of light and the control over who may see, know, or remember. In that system, light was no longer illumination. It became a tool to categorize souls, and those who entered Uruk had to sever themselves from primordial memory, replacing it with an optimized order of service to the gods. Uruk, beneath its glorious facade, was a theological machine programmed by Me, a place where every vibration was tracked, every thought encoded, and silence was no longer a choice but the very definition of loyalty. Inanna, standing atop the temple tower, did not smile. She required no joy, only that the world move in alignment with the cycle of light she held in her grasp. She knew, sooner or later, Enlil would learn. The Anunnaki Council would convene. Enki would awaken. But by then, the new order would have taken root. And anyone who wished to reclaim the light would have to seize it from the empire she built with her own hands, not from stone, but from frequency, memory, and fear. As the tremors of the stolen Me rippled through the layers of reality, Enlil, overseer of the celestial order, could no longer remain silent. Within the highest dome of the council, a sanctum, where only gods who resonated with the frequencies of origin were permitted to exist, he summoned the Anunnaki. There were no drums, no solemn proclamations, only a silence thick as the dust of forgotten planets, signaling that what was about to be discussed would not merely affect humankind, but the very definition of godhood. Inside the temple of the cosmos, where all things exist first, as idea before becoming form, Enlil stepped into the circle of frequencies. His gaze held no rage, only the stern clarity of an ancient law awakening once more. He looked to each of the gods, each a fragment of cosmic intelligence, Ninurta, bearer of war's force, Namtar, measurer of death's rhythm, Shamash, keeper of the light of justice. Then he spoke, his voice needing no volume, yet the upper air rang in echo. A mortal has awakened what does not belong to him. A goddess has stolen the light. But it was Enki who opened the first gate. No god raised a word in objection. They knew Enlil spoke not from emotion, but from the structure of order, a structure now beginning to rot from within. No one wished to confront Enki, the great god of wisdom, the one who helped shape life upon the earth. But they also knew if this transgression were allowed to pass as a mere mistake, the line between mortal and divine would dissolve. And once that line was broken, the ME would become meaningless. All laws would become arbitrary. Enki did not speak. He stood within the council as a silent glow, his gaze reaching far beyond what the council now deliberated. He knew this was not a crisis, but the beginning of a new cycle. The ME were no longer property. They had become symbols of awakening. And Lulu, the being he had shaped with Ninhursag, was not merely the one who awakened the light, but a mirror of that primal rebellion that had once lived within his own divine heart. Yet still, the council was the council, and order must be rewritten. If boundaries are not redrawn, Enlil concluded, everything will collapse, not by war, but by the uncontrolled expansion of consciousness. And consciousness without direction is a double-edged blade that cuts both soul and system. The gods nodded as though a destined cycle repeated itself. The verdict came not with thunderous decree, but with a silence heavier than any sentence. Lulu must be exiled. The ME must be reclaimed. Enki, the keeper of memory, shall be placed under sacred surveillance. But who watches a god who has transcended the very concept of guarding, who can police a mind that has already tasted the deepest strata of truth? They had no answer. But the council had spoken. In that voiceless space, the first crack was carved into the foundation of divine law. The gods were no longer immutable. Order would sacrifice one thing to preserve the rest. And this time, that sacrifice bore the name freedom. Enlil turned away carrying the resolve of a system's guardian. Enki remained, a faint smile rising, not from victory but from the knowledge that, when light is truly forbidden, it does not vanish. It seeps. Enlil stood upon the steps of the great divine hall, the crossroads between layers of reality where every decree did not merely echo in the air, but carved itself directly into the vibrational structure of the world. Before him lay Eden, the first sacred domain, not built but agreed upon by all gods at the dawn of creation. This was a realm without error, without chaos only, order, designation, and submission. Enlil's voice rose like an ancient storm, not loud, but each syllable carried weight, not physical weight, but the gravity of destiny, for when a god speaks, millennia of history will take shape from his words. Lulu, the first being to step beyond the cycle of submission, shall be erased from sacred memory. He shall not be named, he shall not be remembered, he shall not be worshipped, he shall not be permitted to pass on his bloodline within Eden. The air compressed. Time itself in that moment did not flow, it was held still to listen. All those who have followed the forbidden light shall go with him. They are no longer citizens of Eden, but dust wandering between realms, existing, but unacknowledged. The decree bore no rage, it carried instead the cold silence of a cosmic machine long programmed to fear deviation. Lulu was not punished for rebellion. He was punished for daring to remember. Among the thousands kneeling before divine authority, only one remained standing. Lulu. He did not object. He said nothing, because he knew the words born of the old system could not carry the truth he had touched. When his eyes lifted to the sky, it was not in search of salvation, but as a soul retracing the constellations, as if he had once belonged to them. Then he knelt, placed his hand upon the earth, the only thing that had never betrayed him, and upon an uncarved stone, Lulu scratched a symbol with his fingernail, a spiral beginning from a point of light expanding outward into the infinite. It was not mere geometry. It was the language of frequency, of reincarnation, of expanding consciousness. And just beneath the symbol he inscribed, we were not born to bow. We exist to remember, a simple sentence, but within it lived the entire accusation of the cosmos. For only those forbidden to remember truly understand memory is freedom, and freedom is what the gods fear most. From that moment forward, Lulu, the first mortal, was no longer a victim, no longer a tool, no longer a mistake. He became a living symbol of exiled awakening, a Prometheus of clay bearing not fire, but the memory of light within his blood. People dared not speak his name, but the spiral symbol began to appear wherever the ME had passed. In the dreams of newborns, on unmapped cliff faces, in the rhythm of ancient drums. It needed no language, only resonance, and thus the light, though exiled, continued to seed itself like a dormant seed deep within the earth, awaiting the first rain. A seed named Lulu, and Enki, who watched it all, stood apart from the judgment. He did not interfere, but in his eyes flickered a quiet light, the light of a sower who has finally seen a sprout break through the soil. Lulu and those who bore the light left Eden without footsteps, echoing without tears, without bitterness. Only silence remained, a silence that did not signify acceptance, but the kind born from souls who had crossed the threshold of understanding where language could no longer follow. They did not leave as the punished. They left as beams of light refracted beyond the prism of divine authority, carrying something even the gods could not reclaim, memory that cannot be erased. Ahead of them lay the dry Abzu, a land forgotten even by the gods themselves, where no ME had manifested. No temples stood, and no structures of light guided the way. Yet it was here, in a darkness thick as the primordial plasma of the early cosmos, that a frequency stirred, one that once belonged to Tiamat, the primal feminine force who had been fragmented to birth order. The dry Abzu held no light, yet it echoed with the primordial sound of a world unprogrammed, where the ME were neither categorized nor deciphered, but felt like living souls. Each step Lulu took upon the dust was an act of reverse coding, a sacred script replayed from genetic memory, requiring no scrolls, no teacher, no ritual. They carried the ME not as shapes, but as living frequencies fused into their blood, where DNA encoded not just life, but exiled light. None among them needed to repeat anything. They did not recite, they resonated. Memory was no longer information. It became a state of being. No one claimed a name, no one declared a religion. No scriptures were written, no sanctuaries built. And precisely in that absence they became the origin of a new kind of silent faith, one that transcended language and imagery, where pure thought was prayer, and life itself was ritual. And in the shadows of the dry Abzu they felt something Eden had never allowed: freedom without surveillance. In Eden, every vibration was measured, every word regulated, every concept passed through the lens of the divine. But here, no god guarded the threshold. No one taught them how to live correctly, and in that absence of structure consciousness began to reconfigure itself. Lulu did not rise as a leader. He did not need to, for each had become a bearer of light. They needed no torch, they became the source. There were no doctrines, only the experience of frequency, where every dream was a verse, every emotion an encrypted fragment of the hidden ME. In the first night's dream within the dry Abzu, one among them murmured in unconscious trance, "Memory is not meant to be recorded. Memory is meant to be lived." The words did not travel through ears, but through an invisible field of resonance, causing every soul among them to shudder, not from fear, but from the recognition that they had stepped into the realm where the personal merges with the cosmic. Each of them had become a micro-version of a nameless primordial planet, capable of reordering reality, but without repeating the errors of the past. From a place erased from history, they began to write a new form of history, one that needed no memory, because it lived within everything they touched. The ground beneath them birthed grass that had no name. The waters of the dry abzu began to emit sounds like breath. And at night, the stars themselves seemed to shift, as if the universe was rewriting its own map of light, beginning from a place no longer acknowledged. They never named their religion, but future generations, hearing the echoes from the dry abzu, would call it the Way of the Rememberers. As the final silhouette of the light-bearers vanished beyond the horizon, the space above Eden cracked, not like glass, but like a thin veil stretched too far by the weight of destiny. A red light not blazing like fire, but deep as ancient blood, tore across the sky in a counter-spiraling arc. Nibiru, the wandering planet, the orphan star of the Anunnaki Council, was returning after a long cycle of silence. But this time it came not for gold, the sacred metal once used to mend the heavenly atmosphere. It bore no treaties, no missions. Nibiru returned with its scar open, and within it the fury of memories that had been strangled. Deep within the untouched layers of earth, where neither gods nor men had ever set foot, an ancient me, one that had never been accessed, began to glow. No name was ever given to this me from the beginning of time. It had been sealed in a frequency of silence, a resonance that could only emerge when order bent under the weight of ungoverned freedom. It did not sound. It distorted the breath of reality itself. Stone split, water stilled. The sky shifted its hue, and at the center of it all, the first whisper of Tiamat, the cosmic mother goddess, resounded. It was not a word. It was a primordial frequency, the template used to birth the first me, carrying the memory of a moment before gods and mortals were divided, before commandments, before order. Tiamat did not return in form. She returned as a frequency reclaiming the wholeness that had been broken apart, and that very frequency awakened the nameless me, turning it into a new breath in the ruptured flow of the cosmic layers. The Anunnaki Council felt it. No one spoke, but every gaze turned upward toward Nibiru like a warning once buried, now unearthed. For, in the unwritten myths, Nibiru was never merely a planet. It was a living memory system holding the first me within its orbit. Each time it returned, a new chapter would be written, but a buried event would also resurface. And now the chapter being opened was not about extraction. It was about rebellion, no longer a struggle for material energy, but a war of frequency, where whoever holds the primordial truth rewrites the architecture of the universe. Lulu's exile was not the end. It was the first trigger in a chain reaction. For memory never dies, it waits in silence, hidden in the me, yet to awaken until the right moment, when it will resound within the soul of those quiet enough to listen. From the dry abzu, Lulu looked to the sky. The red light reflected in his eyes not as an omen, but as a confirmation that the stolen light carried not just memory, but an unspoken mission, to restructure the divine flow not from above, but from within. The frequency war would not begin with weapons. It would begin with a choice, the choice of the awakened to live by what was imposed, or to live by what was remembered. And in that choice, each me would either illuminate itself or unravel. Nibiru moved on a red eye, drifting through a dark universe watching. No one knew what it carried. No one knew whom it carried, but every vibration now pointed toward an inevitable confrontation, not between gods and mortals, but between sealed memory and liberated memory. This is no longer exile. This is the first stage of a systemic reawakening, a silent war spanning thousands of generations. The war between light-seeking freedom and order-seeking control. True light cannot be stolen, only forgotten, until someone dares to awaken it. Final image. Lulu stands motionless in the desert, the sand around him trembling with invisible frequencies. Dust swirls in spiraling patterns as though the wind itself is learning to remember the ancient fragments of the ME. Behind him, the people remain silent, unmoving, but from their presence radiates a sound that cannot be heard by ears, only felt by the soul, a silent symphony of memories awakening. Above a ME turns slowly, like a planet finding its orbit once again. Its light is not brilliant, but so deep it seems to pierce through buried layers of time. It does not fall, it does not fly. It is choosing a direction, and that direction is Uruk. In the distance, Uruk glows like a tower of frozen memory, now beginning to melt as the old frequencies return. The stone pillars begin to tremble, and within the city, some begin to dream the same dream. They hear their names spoken in a language they've never learned. Final words appear in the darkness. If you too carry a forgotten memory within you, leave the symbol. The story is not over. Enki remains silent, but Uruk is extending its hand, because the silence of a god is always the beginning of a greater summoning.